Hi, my name is Benedict. Today's video is going to look a little different to start with because rather than reason, we're actually looking at a Facebook page. In the Kilohearts sound designers group, Anton, who's a new member, came along and said, has anybody made a hardcore kick tutorial using Phase Plant? Seeing you, of course, will follow me religiously and watch everything I do, then you know that a few days ago I made a walkthrough and overview of my feelings of Phase Plant. It's hard to say that correctly. And I really rather like it as a synth. It's very, very capable. Hardcore kicks, okay, I'm not exactly known for being hardcore, but I did put on my Metallica t-shirt to put me in the mood today. So let's have a little bit of a look. I asked him to send over some examples of the sound that he's looking for, because hardcore can mean a lot of things, and we're actually going to look through this before we do anything, deliberately. So let's take a look at what Anton has thought.
Driving beat is used in initiation in almost every pagan rite. It dulls the senses just like
There's a kick in here somewhere.
It puts them. You find that drums and the driving beat is an absolutely integral part of the ensemble.
Now, in reality, we're probably hearing 3 or 4 different kicks. I also hear some pitching of that kick. So, bend wheel, down. It's easy to do with anything. You can use a synth or a sample or whatever for that. These are most likely samples. Doesn't matter. You can make it in a synth and use it real time, or you can get what you want and sample it off. But I think it's the latter that he's looking for, the really full-on thing. And what we're going to learn is that as we hear here, it's actually layers, and that's the trick in this. It's not in the how do I make that sound, it's how do I make this sound, and that's the mix. It's the magic, if you will, of this style of music. Not my favorite, but I do have respect for it when it's done well. And I actually have a background in its precursors, as I'll show you. The other track. Now, it's easy to think that the kick there is the bit that's going boo-wop, boo-wop, boo-wop. But in actual fact, it's not. There's a kick, and then there's a sound on top of it. So what you've got there is a kick, which if we separate it out, and if you go through this, Anton, you've probably gone through this, and there are times when you hear just a kick. It's possibly originally an analog sample, or from a drum machine like a 505, which was a really rough sample. But the kick itself, it's the stuff that's layered on top. Now, there's no formula for this, or if there is a formula, you probably shouldn't use it, because then you're going to sound like absolutely everybody else. So my advice is that when this works well, yes, there are some elements of familiarity, but there's a lot of novelty in this style. So, now, you may think this is a digression, and you may want to skip it, because you may think, but I just want to hear the sound. But I'm going to run through hardcore and establish what is hardcore. It helps us to understand it, because the first bit that I've given here is critical listening. Critical listening is critical thinking. It's easier to say, oh, but if somebody just tells me to turn the red knob to 45, then I'll be pro. It's not how it works. Absolutely not how it works. Yes, you may be able to do bad clones of whoever, but the problem is you'll never be able to make a hit. You'll never make anything that stands out, because all you'll ever be doing is chasing somebody else, and you need to actually be doing your own thing. Now, the reality here is that a lot of people who've had success in this have really had success by fucking it up. And I'll say that again. They have really had success because they fucked it up. A lot of acts who came up in the time and the ones that are influential for me, therefore I can talk about them the most, they got their sound by trying to get close to somebody else's sound but getting it wrong. Ultravox wanted to sound like Roxy and Bowie, and they got it wrong, but they sounded like Ultravox. They sounded like Ultravox with an exclamation point, and then they sounded like Ultravox without an exclamation point, but they got a unique sound. Same with the band Japan. Japan were a really important band. They influenced a lot of bands like Duran Duran, who wanted to sound like Japan, and Chic, the disco band. And guess what? The Durans got it wrong. But they gave us Duran Duran. So rather than saying, I need to get it right, and this is the only way I'll get it right, the way that you actually win in this environment is by getting it wrong in a way that sounds great. So work with me here, work through the background, the critical thinking, then you can get it wrong and realize how what you're doing wrong is a springboard for doing something even more right than the guy you were trying to be. Let's walk back. Let's go back in time. Hardcore. Hardcore, we can chase the term and the concept back a long, long way. Stockhausen, tapes of trains and ugly noise and what have you. You could say that's hardcore in a sense, but really it became formalized more as a term around this time.
I'm about to have a nervous breakdown. My head really hurts. If I don't find a way out of here, I'm gonna go berserk.
The reason I bring this up, even though it seems to be outside of EDM, and therefore to many people's minds they'll go, oh, but that's irrelevant. It's not EDM, man. That's not real. It's like, no, it's the mindset. The mindset of these guys, Rollins and his pals, came out of the New York Dolls, Sex Pistols kind of mindset, which was, fuck it, I'm not doing it the way that you tell me I should do it, because I don't fucking know how. But I'm going to do it. And they threw themselves at it, and yes, in some ways it's ghastly. But it's also wonderful. If you approach it from the point of view of saying, oh, it needs to sound like Vivaldi, then it sounds awful. But that was part of what they were proud of. But it's the intensity with which they throw themselves at it, that what is wrong becomes right. And the true definition of rightness within this mindset is that you are expressing something grand. Not grand and bombastic, this is not Yes or Asia, but grand is in, I'm angry about, I don't know, that Star Trek got taken off television, whatever this is about. I'm not having a go, I got a lot of respect for Black Flag and bands like this when they do it right. But that's the mindset, that's where you're starting. Never forget it. This is a little bit of a digression, but it is taking that mindset to an extreme and making it very technical. Now, if you do follow a lot of the genres around what you're into, you should be aware of the fact that a lot of extreme EDM is very close to extreme metal. And of course, what's funny is that these guys were on a record label called Earache. Actually, their bass player, Bolt Thrower's bass player, got given one of my tapes back in the early 90s when they did a show in Metropolis in Brisbane. I have no idea what she thought of it. She probably just threw it in the bin, but cool. One of my metal tapes got given to Bolt Thrower. But their label, these guys...
I know now where destructiveness comes from.
So that's taken the mindset of the Black Flag type hardcore, married it with the mindset of the full-on heavy metal guys, the extreme metal guys, black metal, what have you, and applied it to house music. And it's... But this didn't spring out of nowhere. It didn't actually spring out of those things that I've led you towards. Where it sprung from was this. Now hear how simple this is. This is a big lesson. The ultraviolence before, if you actually listen to it critically, you realize there's very little going on. That gives you the space for the enormity of those sounds. And we hear there's not a massive difference when we go back to this stuff. This is very sparse in many ways. It's little details. This was the beginning of this happening. So that was the beginning of it, which the first act in this sort of what became known as electronic body music or industrial, but it was separate from the industrial of throbbing gristle, the like. Neon Judgment, DAF, Front 242 probably became the biggest name in that scene. But start with something like the Neon Judgment. Listen to how simple it is, but it's building up layers of interest. But more important than the sounds is a sense of intensity. Track down the Neon Judgment's Bend My Body Armor. Bend my body armor, bend my body armor, bend my body armor, tear it apart. This is really intense stuff. It may not be a thing that you're used to, but go back, have a listen to it. This is your history. And once you understand your history, it's going to start to make it easier for you to work out how to put the bits together. Because when we get to it, it's all about putting the bits together. If you don't put the bits together right, you'll be nowhere. So the Neon Judgment and Front 242 became the big name there. Start out with something like Headhunter, One You Lock the Target, or Nitzareb. Nitzareb with great sound, really good sort of fast beat the feet, fast for the hands. Really intense stuff. This is 242.
Everyone.
Hear how that sound is really the core of everything that we're doing now. That bass sound largely came off, ultimately came off FM synths. Probably not this, but their sound actually was FM driven. But then these guys. Take some time to listen to Skinny Puppy. They're a bit of a challenge to start with. But what they were masters of, absolute masters of, was taking things that sounded like loops and often were loops, but rather than just doing it in the lazy way that the hip-hop guys were, which was just like, oh, here's a loop, there we go, that's our piece. They were taking bits of things and manipulating them, turning them to something really nasty, but wonderfully nasty. They probably were the pinnacle of this style. They were sort of the Skrillex of their time, except this wasn't mainstream. This was so frightening that lots of people weren't into it. You know, if you went to a party and someone was wearing a Skinny Puppy t-shirt, then they were pretty out there, you know. I know because I tried talking to most of them. But listen to how they work their layers, how they put things together in ways that creates this mash that is the Skinny Puppy sound. So back to where we're going. Now I hope you can hear how the relationship carries through here. So let's go to Reason and open Phase Plant. As I've said in the other video, I don't have any of the plugins to worry about, but you largely don't need them to at least do the basics of this. What we'll start with is an analog oscillator. Not like that, more like that. Now, it will be tempting as you're working to want to go as low as possible. Bass, how low can we go? But what you'll learn as you start to make your mix is that because it's so fast and because it's so noisy, even though you feel like, oh, there's tons of bass in there, no, there's not. There's tons of punch. And bass itself punches very, very poorly. So don't necessarily make the mistake of going too low. Also, don't make the mistake of hearing the standing wave or fundamental frequency in your own room and going, that's it. Because as soon as you move it to another room, it'll have a different fundamental frequency. Your speaker system will have a different fundamental frequency. Somebody else's sub will have a different resonant frequency. Therefore, the lump that you used as being Illin will not be there. So you'll go from going, yeah, to somebody chopped my off. Not cool. Not a fun feeling. Now we want a short sound. Tempting to go a bit long, but it's going to end up sounding too long if we're not careful. Just set your decay and release to about the same time. There are no numbers to set to here. You will not hear me saying, set this to this. That's for losers. Ignore those tutorials. Turn them off. Often, I will generally want an instant attack. Sometimes drums will have a slower attack, but this needs to be a quick kick because we've got so much going on in this mix when we get there. Okay, sounds an awful lot like an early analog drum machine. That means we're going in the right direction. What comes next? Easy to think that we want distortion next. Now remember, you're going to drag that into the signal path. So this plus this comes out here. Easy to just go, I'll just do this. And then go, oh, but I've got too much treble, or I need to put in a filter and all that kind of stuff. No, you're going in the wrong direction. What pulls through on our mix here? Think critically. What's the dominant part of what's actually the kick there? Now I'm hoping that you're actually saying there's treble. There's a lot of treble. There's a lot of front on that kick. How do we put front on a kick? I'm glad you asked that. The common thinking will be to say, okay, take an envelope, put a whole pile of this on the front. Okay, cool. You can definitely do that. And it gives a whole pile of treble it didn't have before. And if you listen to a lot of Skinny Puppy, you'll find that this was a really regularly used sound in their mix, a lot shorter. But this is not where I'm going to suggest that you go. I'm just playing middle C here, so normally you're going to trigger a kick off a C1 or something like that, but middle C is nice and easy, it's in front of me, so don't take my tuning. Take the sound, and it needs to match your mix. So that would be the standard way that a drum machine sound was made, but we ain't going to do that. Back to just our kick. We're going to use our friend noise, drag it into the signal path. Sounds pretty terrible, but we don't want that noise there the whole time. This is designed to pull our kick through the mix, to spear it through, absolutely jam it through, to borrow from Glenn Fricker, to make it into a lead kick drum. So we'll go back and we'll get ourselves a even lop. We don't want no sustain on this thing. We definitely don't want no attack. And we're going to want it to be short. We're going to send that to the level of our noise. Now notice I turned our noise level down to 0. So if we're sending it no thing, no sound. Focus to start with, just on shape. Tempting to focus on trying to get to the end before you've got to the middle, but that's running before you can crawl. So focus on the shapes and then you can focus on the balance. So we want this to be fast. And here how the balance is changing as we play with this. Make those the release match as well, because the last thing you want is to have it short when you press and hold the key, but if you press and release really fast, which lots of drum machines do because they only provide a trigger, then it goes psh and hangs on forever. So make sure your decay and release match. If you want to keep it in the game a little bit, you can do something like that. If I did that, let's just hang on to this because this is actually the basis of pretty cool sound. This is where I would bring in a filter. Now I think that filter probably needs the same kind of thinking. So what I've done there is focused on keeping the filter open so that our noise is really bright on the attack part, the pointy bit on the front that spears it through the mix, that turns it into our lead kick drum, but we're rolling off. Because we don't want that noise to be too dominant through the sustain or the tail. Now remember, your envelope here is actually independent of your envelope here, but seeing this is the main volume envelope, even though this is actually sustaining, we don't hear it because it's cut off by this. So envelopes are not controlled by each other, but you've always got to see them in relationship to each other. So that in itself is a pretty usable kick. And one of the problems we've got there is that the overall tone of this is not going to rip through your mix. Remember the core kick drum, not the overall sound that you hear with all the bah, 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 and stuff on top of it. It's pretty short, pretty sharp, pretty tight. So we can look at, but all we're doing is increasing our noise. Common feature then is our friend distortion. We drag that into the path. You can put this before or after the filter. I'll put it after the filter because we want aggression. Now the more drive you use, the more it's going to bring out a tone, because it's basically turning this into a square wave. So at this point you might find, and this is a mix related thing, and you'll learn this over time, don't let this sound be too long or it's going to destroy your mix. Let your bass sound handle that time. Your kick drum is just designed to spear. So that can work as a basic kick drum. I don't have the snap-ins, but I do have some other doohickeys. I don't have any of their drive things, so we'll stay out of those. But I do have my very best friend, Mr. Scream. This is a reason only thing. but it's a great device. Scream, its overdrive chops off bass. Sometimes that's a great thing. Sometimes it's not a great thing. Remember, we still want this kick to be quite bright. The problem with making kicks and basses in solo or in isolation is that we tend to make them fill every bit of bandwidth we've got. So we make them as loud as we can. Sorry, we'll use my... So we say, oh, okay, I can go right the way up to 0. I'll make it that loud. And, oh, I want it to be bassy, so I feel manly whenever I press the key. We put too much in it. And then when we put in the mix, our mix just goes... and not in a cool way. It just sounds like shit. So remember, the job of this is to spear through the mix, to drag everything else that you do around it. If you then make a bassy bass, which you largely won't because this is just too damn fast for bass to happen, because bass is slow, then you can bring it in with other things. This is the kick. Presence is just a weird EQ type thing that pushes things through. It's punch. It'll either make it sound better or make it sound worse, but try it and see what it does. Commonly, a little bit of it is a good thing. I'm going to add a little bit with this EQ because this is really broad. So this is actually adding a lot of tub into it rather than welly. And that's not a bad thing. But we still want to keep that bright beta sound on the front of it. We can play with strange things like resonators. Kilohertz resonator is actually a nice one. Actually, I'll turn this off and we'll play with theirs. This one I do use quite a bit with instruments. What a resonator is, as you can hear, it's a whole lot of delay lines. Really, really fast and really high feedback rates, so they whine like a bastard. So again, we're using this just to pull out a tone. In this case, I'm not loving it, but I do know I can get the results I want with this. These headphones are terrible for me to hear what's really happening, but that's probably a usable sound. We'll kill him off. Let's go back into here. I think you probably do better in this using external drives. So this is where this system would be really, really good. I could live without these, but for somebody doing the style of music you're looking at, being able to have all of these extra sound gaslifiers in here is going to be really cool for you. Frequency shifter. I needed to tune this, or when I needed to tune this for the mix, rather than going here, I would probably use frequency shifter, because this is going to tune politely. This is going to tune in a fucked up kind of a way, which makes your sound more intense. If we kill the noise, get that. What if we decide to get rid of that sustain? Now we got a nice speary kick. And we'll actually kill that. I know part of you is going to say, but Benedict, this is too bright. Remember, spear through the mix. That's the whole job. Now, in fact, I can hear a lot of whoop in there because this is probably too long. So if we were to make a pattern, and I am not a hardcore guy, so I don't know how the patterns go, That's more new order, but here how as it gets fast, the sound still is discrete. If we put that back to sounds like shit already, because that sound is just swallowing any space. Might be going down here somewhere. So looking at this shape, we can see that our decay is, well, 78 milliseconds. Just match them. Now, you gotta remember, this is not the numbers that you need to look at. The mindset is what you want to look at. 78 milliseconds between when that note starts and when it gets to 0. But we've got a curve, which means that in actual fact it's dropping below the dominance threshold maybe halfway through that time. So its control in the mix is like down in the milliseconds, and that's important because it doesn't matter whether you're looking at double kicks in metal or this kind of extreme drum programming. Speed is everything, because your job's to spear through. It's not your job to make it sound big and oomphy. Do that in hip hop if you want, but that is normally done with your bass. If you want your bass to create more welly, do it with your bass. But remember again, these mixes are about speed. So if there's a slow section, by all means have a nice boom kind of a bass. But when you get into the exciting bits, where we're going in our day glow, then you don't want much bass in that mix. You're looking for aggression, which is ugly mid-frequencies. And this is definitely excelling in that. So we'll call that a pretty decent kick. That's the kick. Now, I think in actual fact, you weren't really asking for the kick. You were asking for all the layers. This is where I'll say, I am not strong in this because I don't do this. I used to do stuff in the EBM arena. Go have a look at my aeroplastic voice stuff, but I never went down this road. However, to do that, we would look at create another group. I would not put this in this sound. If you listen to the mixes of the stuff that I showed you, even just the ones that you sent me, you'll hear that they're using many layers of things, and it's how they build those layers. The best way to build those layers is not in one instrument, but in many. So that way you can have them come and go, and that constant difference and change is what makes it seem exciting all the time. In a ballad, you will probably hear one kick sound the whole way through. You'll hear one, maybe two snare sounds. If it's a real drummer, which, believe me, is far better than somebody flying in samples that have been all... But anyway, if it's a real drummer, every time he hits the snare, he's hitting in a different spot. His snare's probably not that big, but that gives a slightly different sound. But in an actual mix, from a technical perspective, we would count the snare sounds, we'll have one, maybe two. Sometimes the second time you hear the snare, there may be a clap layered in or something like that. But here we'll look at the idea of layers and what we might do. Let's first look to make just a ghastly noise. So, like that, give it an output so that we can start to hear it. Yep, that's pretty horrible. I'm looking for a 7 semitones up, a fifth, because we want this to stay safe. I know we want it to be discordant, but for the moment, we want it to stay safe. So what I'm looking at, counting the math here, is minus 12, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's my fifth below, 1 octave below where I started at, which in actual fact, if we do our counting here, minus 24 and 17 is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, fifth above. So this is playing the fifth above, which is 7 semitones. Just somewhere to start. You can then look at still don't fully understand how those things work, haven't read the manual. But now we're going to work out how we're going to uglify this. Let's see if we just assign it to a self. Sorry, I keep thinking to drag. It's a pretty darn good snare, I can tell you. If we were to think of this as being like a snare, cool. I would simply say, okay, cool, let's take that, put that into our list of instruments that we could use. I'm going to fold them up. Let's have a go at something else. In there. Probably do. What have I done? Ah, I forgot to make a new group. Note to self, make new group. There you go, cool. Now I've learned that in Phase Plant you can actually drag things from one group to another. Winning. I wondered that before, I didn't try it. Output. Now this will be, you might think, oh, but why am I watching this guy? He's just goofing about, he doesn't know what he's doing. Well, 30 years of experience means I've got some idea of what I'm doing, even though this is not my genre. Plus, this is how you're going to learn. So if you say, okay, I've got myself a core sound that I like, in this case it's a kick, we can now say, let's create a toolkit, which is just the same as what happens when you skip down La Dolce Vita and into your favorite drum machine shop and say, sir, I'd like me a drum machine for making hardcore. And he goes, well, sonny, hardcore sucks. But you know what? We got one of them new Elisa's DP4s. I heard that them front 242 fuckers are using that thing. Why don't you buy that? Oh, thank you, sir. Can I have one of them Elisa's D4s, please? And away you go home, and you've gotten yourself a kit. Trouble with that is that front 242, well, they banged the shit out of that kit. So you can just steal all the same sounds that they used, or you can say, I've got Phase Plant, and I'm going to create my own kit. So you construct your own kit. And the way you do it and learn it is by doing this. By saying, okay, I've got my kick, and I'm going to make some other sounds that go with it. Let's get into FM, because there's nothing better for ruining your day than FM. Especially, now we're already using that one, so let's give ourselves another envelope. Especially if FM is controlled volume-wise. So let's styling. This is where I would quite like these Phase Plant to have multi-stage envelope generators. Maybe it does have them, but I have not encountered them. In which case, I'm going to take... I'm going to try this, see what happens. This may fail badly, but I want this to be pretty fast. Not necessarily going the way I hoped. That's alright, we'll Pull that off. Oh, I ended up killing that. Shouldn't have. Actually, no, we'll go to 100 on that. That's safer, and we'll go to 100 on that as well. Here we're starting to get into the territory now of those complex repeating sounds, which so we can control the speed of that with our LFO. If we had multi-stage or MSEGs, then we would be able to say, okay, I'll have an attack and then I'll have a thing. We could do this in Phase Plant by having an envelope, and then if we created ourselves, let's just analyze him for the moment, and we'll move our LFO. Oh, hang on, I didn't create my second envelope. We'll move our LFO just out of the way for the moment. So these two are related to each other. If we know that this guy is 100 milliseconds, actually, let's just turn him on. This won't work for all MSEG situations. Send him to level as well. We've got an awful lot going to level here. At the moment, they're both going at the same time, which means that they basically just double. Lip to lip. We do, however, have a delay. It's working. Sounds pretty unpleasant to me. Where's my... You're going to want to distort that somehow. Again, we're probably better off distorting it out of the box. Actually, that's going through that distortion. I'm going to turn that off for the moment because it's going to smash everything that we got. Some kick. Compression will come in handy here. You're going to tend to want to compress each part. But here has straight away. We're building up that. So it's a case of then working out, well, how do I want my rhythm to work? That's kind of cool. warp in Scream is great for doing really horrible things to stuff. Again, not trying to duplicate that exact sound, but to show you the mindset. Now remember, we would have each of these separated out into a different instrument, so that they're not going through the same drive. You can do that. When you get comfy, you can start to put them through something shared. But the problem with sharing a drive is that when you add something else, it sounds different. And you think, well, that's what I wanted to do. But you lose the sounds that you've created. You lose the discrete sounds. It just becomes one ugly mess. So be cautious of when you bring in external drives as to what they're really doing. And how you make those sounds bigger is simply a combination of layering, good EQ and good mixing, and then some compression. And just outright limiting to buggery as well. So we've got our limiter here. To some extent, we're going to hear how that beeps up as we or if we go slow. But don't do that on your masters. I know I'm showing it here on my masters, but do not do that on your masters. If you've got a section, either a drum or a section of devices, and you want to limit the fuck out of them, put them into a bus. Do your nastiness in the bus. Don't ever do it on your masters. Your masters should be doing nothing, like my masters do nothing but this. So they will just catch strays. That's all they do. And I'll mix down here. My mix, when I'm finished with my whole piece, will not be above this. It could well be to somewhere around -12. I'll do all my mastery stuff, and then I could be adding, say, 6 dB here to drive into my limiter. And then I'm only seeing a tiny bit of flicker here. If you've got a mean mofo of a mix that still has your crest, the 12 dB of crest, then when you put a dB or so off the top with your limiter, it will be big. But remember, it's not about bass. This is all about driving with mids, lead kick drums. Punch, punch, punch. It's speed, and your mids and highs move fast, your bass moves slow. So listen to any hardcore, any extreme metal, not much bass in them at all. There's bass instruments, but everything's pulled up into the higher registers for speed. I hope that helps. It's a lot of mindset stuff, but this should give you the basics to be able to work out, okay, this is a direction I can go in, and I'm hoping that in a relatively short period of time you might pop back into this thread and say, hey Benedict, I've put together a construction kit. So I've made my own kit of sounds out of this, out of what you showed me, and here it is. Thank you for doing that. Thank you for your time and attention. Appreciate this. Appreciate subscriptions. Appreciate positive and useful questions down below as well. I like to know that I've achieved something and that I'm getting something back for that from doing this. Thank you.